During the 1960s and 70s, nuclear power seemed to offer an ideal solution to Minnesota's ever-growing energy needs. Nuclear energy was seemingly safe to use, ethical to use, and above all, reliable. However, later events would cast doubt upon these assumptions and upon the long-term viability of the state's nuclear infrastructure. While nuclear energy still accounts for a significant portion of Minnesota's energy needs, coal and natural gas remain the most widely used sources. The roots of Minnesota's nuclear program can be traced back to the end of the Second World War. In 1945, the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed using nuclear weapons, effectively ending the war in the Pacific with the United States as the decisive victor. In the wake of the bombings, the study of nuclear energy and the acquisition of nuclear weapons became a top priority for both of the world's emerging superpowers. Even as the nuclear arms race between the United States and the USSR escalated well into the later half of the 20th century, nuclear energy became increasingly applied to civilian usage. 1946 saw the establishment of the United States Atomic Energy Commission by the United States Congress. A civilian government organization, the Commission's statement of purpose included the establishment of nuclear power plants throughout the continental United States. As defined by the Atomic Energy Commission, Minnesota is classified as a Region 3 or Midwestern state. The Commission defines 4 main areas in total, comprising the entirety of the continental United States. Region 1, comprising the Upper East Coast. Region 2, which included the southern East Coast and Southwest. Region 3, which included the Upper Midwest. And Region 4, which included Alaska, Hawaii, and all other states in the Union. Minnesota's entry into the nuclear age began in 1958, when a nuclear power plant at Elk River was constructed. Before becoming operational in 1963, the station had been a former coal plant, having been simply retrofitted as a boiling water reactor. After only 5 years, the plant was decommissioned in 1968, apparently due to concerns surrounding structural integrity. The nuclear waste generated at the plant remained long after the development of suburban housing projects. The last of the nuclear waste was not removed until 2004. The shutdown of the Elk River facility necessitated the development of a suitable replacement for the power it had once generated. Even before the shutdown occurred, plans for replacement plants were being drafted. In 1967, construction on a nuclear power plant at the town of Monticello began. On the surface, it must have seemed like an ideal location. Monticello was positioned only 50 miles from the Twin Cities and lay at the edge of the Mississippi River. The technicians were guaranteed a consistent supply of water for the cooling system. Initially, there seems to have been little local protest to the building of this reactor, and indeed little press coverage beyond the local newspapers, which seemed to take a neutral or even positive view. The plant became operable in 1971, and it was originally licensed to operate until 2010. In 1968, a second reactor was built at the Prairie Island Indian Reservation. From the late 70s to early 80s, public attitudes towards nuclear power began to change for the worst. This can be partly attributed to increasing skepticism of the government at the time. However, the single most influential factor was without doubt the now infamous 3 Mile Island incident. 3 Mile Island, named so because of its distance of only 3 miles from the Pennsylvanian capital of Harrisburg, had been host to a major nuclear development since the late 1960s. Like Minnesota's facility at Prairie Island, 3 Mile Island was a pressurized water reactor, relying on a constant supply of water to both act as a coolant and to spin the massive turbine needed to generate electricity. The facility was split into 2 separate reactors, Units 1 and 2, completed in 1974 and 1978, respectively. In 1979, after less than a year of service, Unit 2 experienced a series of mechanical and instrumental failures. On exactly 4 a.m. on March 28th of that year, pumps supplying cooling water to Unit 2 abruptly failed. Backup pumps failed to activate due to having been mistakenly left closed. As a result, the reactor overheated, triggering a nuclear meltdown. A state of emergency was declared, and then-Governor Dick Thornburgh ordered an evacuation of people belonging to certain vulnerable groups within a 5-mile radius. These included the elderly, the disabled, pregnant women, and very young children, amounting to around 40,000 people in all. Nearly 100,000 people actually evacuated. The failure of 3 Mile Island's nuclear facility spurned on anti-nuclear sentiments across the United States. In many major cities and university campuses, anti-nuclear protests erupted. Though neither of Minnesota's two nuclear power plants ever experienced a disaster on the scale of 3 Mile Island, certain events within the next decade would cast doubt upon Minnesota's own nuclear program. In 1981, a minor breach occurred at the Monticello nuclear reactor, dumping approximately 1,300 gallons of radioactive water into the Mississippi. No fatalities resulted from this incident, and there is no evidence indicating permanent damage to the environment had occurred. However, the residents of Monticello seem to have been justifiably alarmed by this incident. Several nuclear safety drills were conducted over the next few months, in anticipation of further incidents. Though no further breaches occurred, the reactor remained at the forefront of Monticello's collective attention for many years afterwards. During this time, protests against the Prairie Island nuclear reactor began to intensify. By the mid-80s, the American Indian movement had reached its height. The Prairie Island plant, and nuclear power in general, became a central issue for the protesters. In 1994, a moratorium against new nuclear power plants was instituted by Minnesota's state government to address the limited space available for storing nuclear waste. The ban was eventually lifted in 2011. There are currently no plans for new plants. Minnesota finds itself increasingly drawn towards renewable or otherwise experimental sources of energy. In particular, renewable sources of power such as wind and solar are favored for their relative ease of maintenance and few environmental or safety concerns. The power station model itself may have a new lease on life in the form of the element thorium. Thorium, unlike uranium, is a relatively abundant element. A large source of thorium can be found well within the United States borders on the border between Montana and Idaho. The area is almost completely uninhabited, and its mining would present very few environmental problems. Drawbacks include its unsuitability for use in nuclear weapons. Thorium, unlike uranium, does not produce weapons-grade plutonium when it decays. This has been cited as one of the main obstacles to the widespread adoption of thorium as a fuel source. Additionally, very little material infrastructure or technology exists which is designed to use thorium in this way. Experimental designs have been proposed in several countries, including Canada, Israel, and India. The widespread use of these designs, either in their home countries or elsewhere. In 2015, Minnesota consumed nearly 1,770 trillion BTU of energy in total. This expenditure is divided among 4 main sectors: residential, industrial, commercial, and transportation. Most of this energy is supplied by coal, which accounts for approximately 272 BTU, and natural gas, which accounts for 449 BTU approximately. Both the Monticello and Prairie Island reactors continue to operate today. Together, the two nuclear power plants accounted for 23% of the state's energy needs in 2016. On the surface, nuclear energy seems to offer a number of advantages over other sources of power. Unlike coal and natural gas, nuclear power plants generate almost no air pollution and contribute very little to the global greenhouse effect. Additionally, a nuclear power plant can be relied on to generate electricity under nearly any and all weather conditions. This makes it more desirable to energy-hungry consumers than certain renewable sources such as wind and solar, whose performance is at least partly dependent upon external weather conditions. However, critics have pointed to certain disadvantages, including increasingly high costs of maintenance as the infrastructure continues to age. Additionally, both power plants lie very close to what are now major sources of water or environmentally sensitive areas. Urban development has ensured that formerly isolated areas are now heavily populated, raising concerns about potential damage to life and property in the event of a breach. The very presence of nuclear radiation may itself have deleterious effects on local communities and wildlife.
Would you want to buy a house in an area that routinely accumulates radiation downwind from Prairie Island reactors or from Monticello? Maybe not. Maybe, but maybe not. But that you have a right to know that. You have a right to know whether the house that you want to buy is in an area that is routinely contaminated when routine releases come from the reactor.
Perhaps the greatest drawback is the problem of long-term storage for spent fuel rods and other forms of nuclear waste. The most promising potential solution to this problem comes in the form of a dedicated storage facility at Yucca Mountain. First proposed by Congress during the presidency of Ronald Reagan in 1987, The facility would be an elaborate underground complex 1,000 feet below the surface. Once operational, Yucca Mountain would serve as a permanent repository for the country's nuclear waste. For 31 years and 5 presidencies, the facility remains under construction. Its eventual date of completion is still undetermined. For now, much of Minnesota's nuclear waste remains in local storage. What will become of Minnesota's nuclear reactors remains an unanswered question. Current state policy favors the maintenance of the existing plants but forbids the construction of new facilities. However, both of Minnesota's 2 currently operational plants continue to play a vital role in satisfying the state's energy needs. The license of the Monticello reactor, originally set to expire in 2010, was renewed in 2008. Assuming the license is not renewed again, the reactor is currently set to be decommissioned in 2030. Similarly, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission voted in 2011 to extend the license to the Prairie Island reactor until 2034. By the time they are decommissioned, both reactors will have been operating continuously for over 60 years. Without doubt, the need for an ideal source of energy, one that is reliable, safe, and ethical to use, still needs to be addressed. It is almost equally certain that the issues of growing energy needs, along with fewer material and financial resources, will take on increasing urgency in the coming years and decades.